Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to today's video of the Hindu analysis. Before we dive deep into the newspaper for today, an important reminder. As you know, we are now on Telegram as a channel called Byjus Exam Prep IAS. If you're still not joined the channel, please make sure you click on the link given in the description of the video, or you can also scan this QR code to get all the latest current affairs updates about the UPSC examination. Now let's begin with the first article from the Hindu newspaper today that talks about the global south and what these nations can do. Now before I go deeper into this article, just a very quick background. When you talk of international relations, when you talk of different nations around the world, North and South are the two terms that are used very regularly. The term South usually refers to developing nations and the least developing countries. On the other hand, when you say the word North, it means the developed nations. Now, please don't confuse them with the hemispheres. There are certain nations in the southern hemisphere also that are actually considered a part of North, for example, Australia. So just remember, South refers to developing nations and the least developed nations, while the North refers to the developed nations. Now let's come back to the article. The author is saying that right now, internationally, we are going through a very tough time. The world again seems to be divided into two groups, one led by the US and other where Russia and China are trying to influence as many nations as possible. We know that if you look at numbers clearly, there is no match for US. Yes, China is growing its power. Yes, militarily, China is making a lot of progress. But even then, the gap between US and the second ranked nation, that is China, is humongous. So US right now enjoys a position of a monopoly. However, the US also understand that Russia, China coming together is a threat to the US. That is why the US has also been trying to ensure that Russia's ambitions of expanding further and the Chinese ambitions also to get more area in Asia and in Africa do not actually turn into a reality. That is why the US is trying to displace China from its second position. Russia, on the other hand, has not really been able to win the Ukraine war, which many people expected it would do just in a few days. However, Russia still has vast natural resources and military capability, and the US is aware of that. That is why US also is trying to increase its clout over the other nations around the world as much as possible. Most countries of Europe, at least Western Europe, are firmly behind the US. However, there has been a very interesting change that has happened. The interesting change is, while US has never been a great advocate of letting go of weapons or demilitarization, Europe in fact, ever since the Second World War, has been in favor of reducing the number of weapons and reducing the spend on their military. But now with the expansionist approach of Russia, Europe also now seems to be agreeing to US that it is the time to militarize once again and spend much more on their military budget. In this situation, the author says a very important part has to be played by the global south. That is, the developing nations having leaders such as India have to come forward and ensure that this divide between the two sides does not really become a huge gap. Now, the situation is not the same as we had in the Second World War or in 1960s, 70s when the Cold War was going on. At the time of the Cold War, most of the world was divided into two parts. And the nations which were not a part of any of the two groups were not that powerful, were not that significant to make a change. As per the author, the situation is not the same right now. Amongst the nations, those who are not a part of any of the two groups or those who have good relationship with both the groups, there is India also, and we can play a very important role here to ensure that the world does not go into the worst case scenario. The author says that countries such as India, China also has been included here because China also officially is a developing nation now. They have been blamed by US, Europe for not allowing sanctions against Russia. US has been saying that the reason why sanctions against Russia have not been successful is because South nations like India, China are continuously buying oil and gas from Russia. While they may be true factually, but the fact is that we cannot be blamed for that. For example, India has time and time again said that we will ensure that our people, the people of the country, get the cheapest oil, get the cheapest gas. That is what our priority is. At the same time, Europe itself is still buying gas from Russia. So it's no point just blaming India for that. Secondly, the US somewhere is responsible for not allowing Venezuela and Iran to bring their oil in the global market. If they allow that, then automatically the prices of the oil will reduce and India will not have to buy the Russian oil. So that is why it's not fair to just blame the developing nations for that. In fact, most of the developing nations, including India, have remained neutral in the ongoing Russia Ukraine war. Mainly because a lot of them are dependent on Russia for a lot of things, not just the Russian energy, but also fuels, fertilizers, wheat, and other defense equipments coming in from Russia. West also cannot say that we have been helping the developing nations and they should come to our side. For example, when the COVID 19 vaccination came up, the Western nations did not provide any exemption on the patent. That is why, in a lot of African nations, still the access of vaccines for COVID 19 is minimal because the patent still holds. Secondly, when the developing nations were in trouble and their refugees were trying to go to Europe and US, they were not really welcomed. Unlike the Ukraine scenario, where people from Ukraine are being welcomed in European nations, the same treatment was never given to Asian or African people. So the Western nations can't now say that we have been very, very helpful. Why are you going towards Russia? Russia and US, both of these at the end of the day will follow their own national interest. So right now it is not fair for US to expect all the developing nations just to be on the side of the US. Amongst the developing nations, yes, there are fears of the expansionist policy of China, but still none of these developing nations have either been in a military alliance with US or in a military alliance with China or Russia. In fact, many developing nations, included in Africa also, have been critical of what US is doing. Recently, the US Parliament passed a bill called the Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act, meaning that they can pressurize the African governments and leaders not to engage with Russia. In response, the African foreign minister said that the US cannot bully any African nation and such kind of a bills should not be passed. China, on the other hand, is also trying to woo as many developing nations as possible. China recently waived off debt from 17 African nations, the same thing that India had done earlier as well. The author here says that if you take an example of India, you will realize how developing nations are playing their cards very, very safely. India, for example, is a part of groups where US is a prominent member, be it Quad, be it other groupings such as G20. On the other hand, we are also a part of groups where Russia and China are members, be it the BRICS, be it SCO and other kind of summits. So India has been playing this balancing game beautifully and the other developing nations should also learn from this. Another thing of great importance that is actually happening around the world is that US has been trying to blackmail many nations, threatening that they will freeze their dollar reserves. That is why many developing nations are now trying to do trade in some other currency and not dollar. Now let's try and understand how can the US freeze dollars of other nations. Let's take an example. So we say, for example, right now, India has over $500 billion of foreign exchange reserves. Most of them is in the form of dollar. Now, when Reserve Bank of India, let's assume, has $200 billion, $300 billion, they also want to earn some interest on that. So how do they do that? They know that the safest way to earn interest is that they will actually buy treasury bonds of US. They will actually go ahead and invest this money in the US Federal Reserve, which will not really give them a lot of good interest. It's just 1-2% of interest. But even then, RBI thinks having 0% interest, better than that, we can at least have 1 or 2% interest. Meaning that nations around the world park their extra dollars with the US government to earn 1 or 2% of interest. This gives humongous power to the US because US can now say tomorrow that we will not give back your dollar. Why? Because you're not behaving well. It's like the teachers punish the students. Because you're not behaving well, I'm punishing you. So this fear that nations think that their dollar reserves can be frozen by US whenever the US government wants, that is why many developing nations are now trying to deal in some other currency. Currency swap agreements have also been signed by China, ASEAN, India and Russia also and many other nations. That doesn't mean that the power of dollar is ending, but that does mean that other currencies are also trying to find an alternate path to the top. Also, whenever you talk about North and South, do remember the name of this line. I want to share this with you. This is called the Brandt line. Brandt line is this line which is almost approximately 30° north. This is the line which is said to be the division between North and the South world. As I told you earlier, there are always exceptions. Look at Australia here. Australia also is a part of the North group. North means economically more advanced group, economically richer as compared to the South group, which is considered to be developing and the least developed nations. This line is named after the West German chancellor called Willy Brandt, and that is why it's called the Brandt line. I'm sure all of you are very well aware of the North-South divide. The divide in terms of North and the South countries can be seen in almost every aspect, be it the GDP, be it the per capita income, be it the debate about pollution, where the North nations say that it is the South nation that have to control their emissions, while the South nations say that it is the North nations because of their industrialism that we all are suffering right now. So this divide between North and South is being seen in almost every sphere of the society, and it's not just economic, it's in every single field. Be it food security, be it availability of vaccines, be it environmental pollution, so on and so forth. That is why the global South has to come together if they have to fight and argue against the power of the North. The next article that we have here is about the G4 nations coming together and reiterating their demand that the UN Security Council needs reforms. G4, as you know, is a group of 4 nations which includes India, Germany, Brazil and Japan. These are the 4 nations that have been demanding that the UN Security Council should evolve, should be reformed. Why? As you know, the UN Security Council has 5 permanent members. Those permanent members which essentially were on the winning side of the Second World War. Then there are 10 non-permanent members as well that get a 2-year tenure. But it is the permanent members that have the biggest power, that is the veto power, and they decide how the UN Security Council will run. It has been many years since the G4 group has been demanding reforms in the UNSC. In a recent meeting in the UN this week, this demand was reiterated. India right now is a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Now, this is not the first time that the G4 has demanded this. Also, this is not the only group that demands that we need a representation in the UNSC. We also have the African nations that demand the same. We also have the Middle East nations that demand the same. Then we have the South American nations that also put forward such demands. So it is not the only group that is demanding something like this. The G4 group also said that we support the demand of African nations also. They also deserve a seat in the Permanent Security Council membership. The US President Joe Biden said that we are okay with expansion of UNSC. However, whenever nations such as US or China agree that okay, we are okay with expansion of the Security Council, they put in certain exceptions. For example, in 2021, the US State Department had said that US supports the expansion of the UNSC provided that the veto power does not expand or veto power does not alter. So they are okay with having new members but not okay with giving them veto powers. That is where the entire debate has actually been curtailed. Now there are a lot of issues with the working of the UNSC. I'm sure you might have read many of them. Let me give you a few examples. The first interesting issue is that unlike the General Assembly, in the UNSC meetings, there is no record of text or any of the meetings that are held. So after a meeting, if you want to refer to what happened in the meeting, the minutes of the meeting as they are called or transcript of the meeting, that is just not allowed. There is no rule that is applicable to the UNSC meetings and how the records will be kept. Then there is also an issue of the veto power. We see the UNSC hardly has consensus on anything. Whenever the US comes up with a proposal, you can always expect Russia to veto it. Similarly, when China comes up with a proposal, you know that US will veto it and this will not go forward. There are also a lot of divisions among the P5, that is why frequent decision making is delayed and it remains a very underrepresented organization. It was based on the result of the Second World War. And since then, the world has changed drastically. That is why we need to give representation to other parts of the world as well. This infographic gives you the details of the UN Security Council. As I said, there are 5 permanent members, while there are 10 non-permanent members as well. The permanent members are the only ones that have the veto power, while the non-permanent members do not have the veto power as such. The next article that we have here is about India's dwindling foreign exchange reserves. Now, as you know, this has been happening over the past year or so. Money is losing its value, it's depreciating. The reason being that the number of foreign exchange reserves that are stored with the RBI are also declining. For the first time ever, rupee touched a mark of 81 as to a dollar. That has also been because the foreign exchange reserves in India are declining. In the last 12 months or so, we have spent about $94 billion of foreign exchange reserve, and they are now about $545 billion that are stored with the RBI right now. The reason is very simple. Because of this inflation, because of the declining value of rupee, the RBI is pumping a lot of dollars in the market, but still we are not seeing the results as expected. The reason is very, very simple. Try and understand this. What is happening is nations around the world, including the US especially, is facing very, very high inflation. Now, during the pandemic, what US government had done was they had distributed a lot of money to their own people. They printed money, they distributed it free of cost, because of which, as expected, there is now inflation in the US. Now, to contain that inflation, the US Federal Reserve is actually increasing its interest rate. Why? So that the people actually give the money to the bank to earn better interest. So US Federal Reserve is increasing its interest rate. They just increased it by 0.75% recently again. The result is that those people who have invested money in India from the US, now they think that if in US itself their bank is increasing the rate of interest, why not bring their money back to the US only and take it out from India? This is what has been happening. A lot of money has been going outside the Indian market back to the US, because in US also they know that their money is the most secured in US. They know that now they are getting better rate of interest, so there's no point in parking their money in India. That is why a lot of dollars are going out of the Indian market, and the RBI, in order to manage that, in order to settle that, is spending its own dollars, and the cycle is just continuing. That is why not just rupee, all other currencies in the world, look at euro, look at pounds, all of these are facing the same depreciation against the dollar, because all this investment around the world is now going back to the US because of the increased rate of interest announced by the Federal Reserve. The rupee, as you know, has depreciated over 8% against the dollar in 2022, and this is not just with India but most other nations around the world. That is why, even though we are buying cheap oil from Russia ever since the war began, we have not been able to take a lot of advantage, because on one hand we are buying cheap oil, on the other hand we are still losing a lot of dollars because RBI has to flow it into the market, and that is something that will take some time to actually come under control. Also remember, when you say foreign exchange reserve, we don't just talk about dollar. Foreign exchange reserves comprises of various things. Gold reserve, special drawing right, SDR, which is the currency of the IMF, then reserve tranche in the IMF, and foreign currency asset. This is mainly maintained in dollars, so it's not that only dollars form a part of the forex reserve. It is majorly in dollars, but not always in dollars only. Also, this is the latest graph I wanted to show you to give you an idea about how India's foreign exchange reserve is declining. As you can see, in July it was close to $600 billion. Since then it has been declining because of increasing inflation, the Federal Reserve increasing their interest rate, money going out, the RBI has had to balance that. So do make sure that we keep a track of this declining graph as well. The next article that we have here is about the problem of rabies that we are facing in many parts of the country, specifically in the state of Kerala. What has happened is, a couple of weeks back, a 12-year-old girl in Kerala died after being bitten by a dog. The girl did have the rabies vaccination, but still she could not survive. Since then, there has been protest all across the state, and the government of Kerala has set up a committee to look into this issue of the stray dogs. Now, number of animal census suggests that the number of stray dogs in Kerala have increased considerably. Because of that, the number of dog bites have also increased. There were just 60,000 in 2013, and now we have about 2.2 lakh cases of dog bites in 2021. This is why this problem is becoming increasingly common and is very, very dangerous. The rabies positive cases are also increasing, which is an indicator of the spread of disease from animals to the humans. Now, as you know, rabies is a disease which mainly fox, dogs, these kind of animals have. When they bite humans, if the dog also was infected by rabies, then the disease gets transmitted to humans as well. When it comes to humans, it becomes a very, very dangerous, very, very fatal disease. The Kerala Health Minister has said that Kerala government has decided to make the state free of rabies deaths by 2025. Under this, they have launched an ABC program. Under the program, the Kerala government says that the dogs will be picked up from the streets for vaccination and for sterilization and will be kept for observation for some days, and they'll be returned to the same place after that. Many medical experts have also said that we need to study the virus that is causing rabies right now. Because earlier, how rabies ended up in dogs was that dogs caught the rabies virus from fox. But in these times, you don't see a lot of wild animals which are in contact with the dogs. So, how is it actually still being transmitted to the dogs? Is it mutating? We still have to consider that. So, medical experts want much more study to be taken up in this regard if we have to fight this. One other big problem is that we are seeing in a lot of cases people who already had the rabies vaccine, they are also dying. Thus, questions are also being raised about the quality of the rabies vaccine. And there have been many studies conducted that the rabies vaccine would not be of the appropriate quality, and that is why the problem is still increasing. Many legal experts say that laws such as prevention of cruelty to animals, etc., have not been implemented properly. And that is why there are two sides right now. One, the animal rights campaigners who say that dogs should not be killed, dogs should not be attacked just to check rabies. There has to be a proper procedure for that. On the other hand, there's the other group which says that human life is much more valuable as compared to dog life and they should be given a priority. And even if we have to take the life of dogs in order to curtail this disease, we should not step back. The government of Kerala had also given the responsibility to the famous self-help group, that is Kudumshri, to actually ensure that the problem of street dogs actually decreases. But the court recently said that Kudumshri, that is a self-help group, should not work in this field. Rather, we should have specialized agencies who are trained in this to work in the field of picking up dogs on the streets and giving them the appropriate vaccination. There's also one other part of the problem that we usually don't focus on. This is the problem of waste management. Many people say that the reason why we have a lot of stray dogs, the reason why we see a lot of dogs on the streets is because this is where they expect to find food. Because a lot of people dump their waste and unused food on the streets, you can find a lot of dogs in the streets where a lot of human population also is settled. This is what becomes a problem. Because when you have a lot of interaction between humans and stray dogs, this is when it gets dangerous, especially for the kids. Because for a dog to reach the face or neck of the kid is very easy. So for them to attack the kids is much easier. This is where we have to be much more careful. As I said earlier, the rabies deaths have been a matter of concern and a study has been conducted on the quality of vaccination because many people are not satisfied with the quality of vaccination that we have. Now, because this has become such a big news, it's also important for us to understand something about the rabies disease. It is a zoonotic viral disease. Zoonotic means it can enter humans through animals. It is caused by rabies virus. It is actually an RNA virus which is present in the saliva of a rabid animal, which may be dog, cat, or a monkey. It is 100% fatal, but also 100% vaccine preventable. The problem is 1/3 of the global rabies deaths are just recorded in India only. In fact, India's health ministry says that each year 20,000 people die due to vaccine preventable fatalities. More than 99% of human deaths due to rabies are caused by dog mediated rabies. So although multiple animals have the rabies virus, it is mainly the dogs that are the most dangerous when it comes to humans getting human rabies. These are some of the other facts with regards to rabies disease. If you want, you can just go through them and try and understand some of the finer details because they can be asked in the examination. The next article that we have here is from the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court has refused to entertain a plea where a petitioner was asking that just like the tobacco, on the alcohols and the liquor bottles also, the packaging should include a health warning. The Supreme Court said that we are not interested in doing this because this is a policy matter. So Supreme Court said let the government, let the parliament decide this, we will not make these kind of a rules. Supreme Court also said that in certain studies it has been proven that having a very small amount of liquor can actually have certain health benefits. On the other hand, for cigarettes, there are absolutely no health benefits. So the Supreme Court said that in cigarettes, because there is no health benefit, it is fine to display those kind of warning signs. But in consumption of alcohol, where some good points may also be included, it doesn't make sense to have that kind of a health warning. So Supreme Court said that we are not the one to decide that. The petition should be taken back. We are leaving it to the policymakers to decide if they want to go ahead with such warning signs on the packaging or not. Now, as you know, tobacco products in India, mainly cigarettes, do have certain rules for displaying pictorial warnings on their packaging. Now, I hope all of you are aware that from December 1, in fact, new rules are coming up. What are the new rules? From December 1 now, tobacco products, including cigarettes, will also have to write that tobacco causes painful death. This warning signal should also have to be included in the packaging now. As you know, the cigarettes and other tobacco products right now do have some very bad images of people who have been infected by such diseases related to tobacco. In fact, a few years back, the government had made a rule that 85% of the packaging of cigarettes, etc., should carry the pictorial warning. So it should be big enough for everyone to see. The history is that in 2017, if you actually search, Karnataka High Court had struck down this order. Karnataka High Court had said that there is no need to carry this big of a warning. But next year in 2018, Supreme Court again upheld it. So it was struck down by the Karnataka High Court, but again upheld by the Supreme Court in 2018. So we still have this 85% of the packaging rule where a pictorial warning on the cigarettes has to be mentioned. And from this December 1st, not just this, a text warning will also be given which says tobacco causes painful death. Any person engaged in manufacture, supply, production or handling of any tobacco products has to ensure that all the tobacco product packaging have specified health warnings exactly as prescribed. These were the important articles to be discussed on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Despite a series of efforts, the problem of human rabies remains a big challenge in India. What are the significant reasons behind this? Second, do you think that pictorial warnings on tobacco products discourage people from its consumption? Discuss. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.